Hi and welcome to this video about a mystery machine. So this is a machine I got with a kind of bunch of stuff that I got cheap off Facebook Marketplace a few months ago. I got some interesting sound cards and things in that collection of stuff, but one of the things I got was this box. I'm not entirely sure what's in it, but today we're going to take a look and see if we can make something of it. A quick whiz round the machine. So looking at the back, we can see it's got a power supply. I can see it's got a motherboard of some description in there, and the expansion slots are all empty, so no cards unfortunately, but yeah, we can fill those slots. And lurking in the depths of the insides, we've got a bunch of cables, SATA cables, so it looks like it's quite recent, whatever it is. And we've got a couple of drives, some kind of optical drive, a floppy drive, and a motherboard. Pretty much it, so I think we'll just have to get all the stuff out and take a look at what we got. There's some loose bits and pieces rattling around in here, like the USB flap cover thing from the front. And we've got Alps floppy disk drive, and we've got a Sony DVD drive as well. Power supplies from somebody called Wind Power. I've not heard of them. I suspect they're a cheap and nasty manufacturer. 650 watts. Motherboard's from Asus. It's an M2N68-LA and it's based around NVIDIA's Enforce 430, which includes onboard GeForce 6150 SE. Socket AM2, so it's a AMD board, and yeah, it's interesting because it's at that kind of crossover between what I think of as kind of retro and modern. So we've got a right mix of connectors on here, some old and some that have become the standards that we're used to up to this day. I don't really regard AM2 as retro 2006. I do suppose it's getting on to be 20 years old, but yeah, I did Socket 939 and then AM2 back in the day. I don't think I'm going to be doing anything that I'm going to keep with this machine, but it'd be nice to take a little nostalgic look at AM2 once again. I think back in the day I was running Athlon X3 on my AM2 machine, and it had a little trick to unlock the fourth core, which it did stably, so that was quite cool. So I guess this was my late XP gaming, and on that AM2 machine I actually remember upgrading to Vista for the first time. It wasn't actually that many PC upgrades ago that I did it either, because since I sort of got into retro I haven't really kept up to date with the modern PC stuff. I noticed there was no I/O panel for the motherboard, so it gives me a chance to try one of these things out. So I bought these a while back just on impulse. They're sort of do it yourself plastic I/O panel things. I guess you cut out the shapes that you need. So gave it a go, and a bit later, a couple of abortive attempts as well, ended up with this, and it looks quite smart actually. I'm quite pleased with it. A bit fiddly and a bit brittle, but yeah, that's quite smart looking really. Just gave the case a bit of a wipe. There was just some fluff and dust in there. The motherboard was quite dusty, so just gave it a brush with some anti-static brushes, and we're ready to put everything back together. So get the motherboard back in, see if it fits my new faceplate I/O panel, and yep, then we'll see what else we can put in there. I have to say, these universal I/O covers, I'm actually quite impressed with them. They're quite tricky to work with. They're very brittle. If you're not careful, it's easy to snap sort of extra sort of bits out of the grid that you don't want to. But if you are careful, this looks quite smart. So I think I'll probably use them again in the future if I ever get any other motherboards that are missing that particular thing. Before I start putting the innards back together, I decided to try and take care of some of the cosmetics, because I do like the look of the case and I'll probably want to use it for something permanent. So the first thing was the little USB hatch at the bottom, and that had two little pins that had snapped off, moulded plastic pins that go into holes on the faceplate, and they've both gone. So there was enough room there to drill a couple of holes, which I did, and then pushed some screws through them, and those screws just basically replaced the missing lugs that went through the holes on the faceplate and allowed the thing to swivel again, and then just put some strong epoxy adhesive over the top of the screws so they don't fall out. So that was one thing, and that worked pretty well. The other thing was, when I took the front cover off, I found two loose wires and I wasn't quite sure what they were for, but it turns out that they're for LEDs, and there are some LEDs underneath that kind of frosted blue pain at the front, and it would be nice to get those working again. So I gave them a quick test with the coin cell, and all the LEDs are working, so I'm not quite sure why these things were cut. I imagine it's because there's no header on the motherboard for them. I'm going to have the same problem, so a couple of options. I can either splice them into something that supplies the 5 volts to the LEDs for the hard drive and the power, which I don't really want to do, or since I've already tested them with a coin cell, I think what I'll probably do is just wire them up to a coin cell holder, which I can just then sit inside the case, and when the batteries run out, I'll just replace it. Front's back on, so we can get the innards back inside. There was no hard drive with this, so I've added in a Mac Store 80GB drive, and I also noticed that the DVD drive that came with this was an IDE drive, when there's no IDE sockets on the motherboard. The guy who gave me it did say that he couldn't get it working, and I did wonder what his skill level was at. Perhaps he put his DVD drive in and then couldn't plug it in anywhere and gave up. Who knows? But I had to take that out and go and find a SATA one. We've got a connector for the floppy disk, so that can stay, get the hard drive in, get everything else hooked up, and we're good to go. And time to get the battery, the power supply for the LEDs sorted out. So I've got this little holder. It actually takes 2 stacked CR2032s, so it's going to give us a little bit more than 5 volts. It's going to give us 6, I think. Need to sort the polarity out, and then I'm just going to twist the wires together and put a bit of electrician's tape on them, because if I ever want to take the front bezel off again, this holder will not pass through the tiny little hole that I need it to, so I can just quickly untwist them and then I'll be able to get the front cover off. This thing has a switch on itself, and there's also a switch on the front underneath the USB cover to turn these lights on and off, so I'll just leave it turned on in here, and then flipping open the front lid and pushing the button, and check that out. It's going to look pretty funky on a cold winter's night with the lights turned down low. Next thing to check was, do I actually have a processor to run in this? And looking at my AMD processors, luckily I do. So I had 2 Socket 939 and 1 AM2, and this one is an Athlon 64X2 5000 Plus, which is one of those ones that's sort of marked on its performance rather than its true clock speed, which is actually 2.6 gigahertz, but I'm just glad I've got something to put in the machine, so we'll go with this. Get the thing in the machine, and I put the processor in. It still hadn't clicked at this point that I didn't actually have the back plate for my cooler, but yeah, unfortunately for some bizarre reason the back plate has been removed and I can't fasten the cooler to anything. So luckily I went off and had a bit of a dig around in my big pile of stuff and found the bits I needed. So eventually we did get a cooler on there, and yeah, I think we're about ready to fire it up. We're going to give it a go first with the onboard graphics and see how that looks. Cooler in, just need to find some memory, so I managed to find some nice matching sticks from OCZ, 1GB each. This is DDR2 800, so there's 4 gigs in there now. Once all the cables are hooked up, we can stand the thing up and see if it posts. And it did, so that's all cool. I think we're ready to do a bit of installing. So the usual procedure, get Windows XP Professional installed, and then we'll be able to mess about and see how the thing performs. And once XP was installed, get the Enforce drivers on, get the sound drivers on until the exciting bit of this is going to be getting a real graphics card in there, but I thought just for fun and to see how this GeForce 6150 SE that's supposedly on board works, we'll give it a quick go in 3D Mark 2005 and see how it stands up. And as you can see, it's not pretty. It's all a bit of a slideshow, so yeah, you wouldn't want to be doing anything other than maybe playing solitaire with this particular onboard graphics chipset. But yeah, it was pretty dismal. I was expecting a bit more, actually, to be honest. It was a DirectX 9 onboard graphics, just couldn't do anything with 3D Mark. So yeah, mighty score, 885 3D Marks. We'll have to see if we can improve on that. And for our choice of graphics card, we're going to be using this. This is a Radeon X1800GTO, my very own one that I've had since buying it back in about 2006. It saw me through some very happy XP gaming times, and I probably haven't had it in a machine for, I don't know, 15 years or more. So it'd be nice to reacquaint myself with this. X1800 was an interesting card. I think it was the first one that did crossfire without the need of any kind of extra bits and pieces, or did it through the motherboard. It'd be interesting to possibly try that at some point in the future. It had a 256-bit memory bus with 256 megabytes of RAM and was a solid mid-range performer back in the day, I think. I think it's slotted in somewhere between the 7600 and the 7900 on the NVIDIA side. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this card, and I think it performs well enough to play a lot of the games that I enjoyed back in the day. At this point I hit a bit of a snag because the X1800GTO requires power from a 6-pin socket from the PSU, and this PSU doesn't have one. So digging around in my box of adapters, I did find some Molex to 6-pin adapters and thought I'd give those a go, but didn't seem to like those, unfortunately, and that meant I had to swap power supplies, which was a bit of a pain. So I put in a slightly more advanced power supply that had everything you'd expect for a machine of this spec, and then everything worked fine. And once I checked that it was all working, put it all back together and get the ATI drivers loaded, and everything was looking good. So the first thing I did was run 3D Mark 2005 again, and it's a whole different world. It's a much smoother experience, and that even on the high settings, I think it was coming in on over 30 frames a second or around 30 frames a second. So the score we got was 6,876, so just a slight difference to the onboard graphics there, but that's a pretty decent score, so pretty pleased with that. So this video isn't really about building a machine that I'm likely to keep or use a lot. It was really just to check out the bits that I got in that job lot. So all I'm going to do now is play a game, and I'm going to play Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth, which is for me my favourite XP game, and one I spent many hours playing, probably on this very graphics card. So it'd be nice to load that up again and have a little go. For anybody who doesn't know, Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth was a game that launched in 2004. So I did get it in 2004, and I remember it sort of sat on my game shelf for a while. I would have had my Socket 939 machine at the time I bought it. Didn't really play it much, didn't really get into it. It was much later in 2006 with this very card and on my AM2 and my Athlon X3 that I played it and thoroughly enjoyed it once I got into it. If you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings films, you'll like this game. I think this is probably the best tie-in you could possibly ever wish for. It has all the original actors doing the voices, it has the original Howard Shore music, and really does capture the vibe of the whole thing rather well, if you're into real-time strategy, that is, because this game is primarily real-time strategy with possibly some bits that are more like real-time tactics, but excellent game, thoroughly recommend it. So that's pretty much it for this video. It wasn't really a video with purpose, it was really just to have a look at this box that's been sitting there waiting to be put away for a long time. So I'm going to break it up now, put the motherboards and things away with all the other motherboards and things. The one thing that came out of this that I really like is the case. I love that case with its little LEDs, and I think I'm possibly going to use that. I want two machines out permanently to game on. I've already got an XP machine, and that's got SLI GeForce something or others in it at the minute, which I'll be upgrading shortly, and I think I'll use this case to make my regular gamer Windows 98 machine, so I'll probably see it again. And also, since I got my X1800GTO out again, it's now in my head that I want to do some crossfire without the bridge cable and that kind of thing. So yep, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed just this little look at some random stuff. I'm going to play out with some Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth, so thank you for watching if you've managed to make it this far, and I hope you'll join me for the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Trespassers! Protect